how did you guys get into sport and performance psychology? Either one of you can start us off. Dr. Clark, how about you?
Sorry. Okay, could you ask the question again, please?
Yeah, how did you guys get into sport and performance psychology?
I think many of us have been in it for many, many years. Yeah. No, seriously, for myself, I've been in sports psychology for about 35 years now. And being an athlete, it was just natural for me to go into sports psychology. Really?
I think a little bit of a similar route. I've been an athlete throughout my childhood and adolescent. I played tennis probably since age 10. I focused on that, and I could definitely tell that there's a mental aspect that I don't excel at. Um, Fast forward, I was in the army and I got out of the army and I started studying psychology and I got together with my coach from back in the day and he said, listen, there is this thing called sports psychology. You should totally go for it. And I think I was hooked from that point on.
So let's stay in that kind of realm. What is the importance of disseminating sports psych principles to those who ordinarily do not have access to implementation of the mental game?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part of your question. Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah, what's the importance of disseminating sports psych principles to marginalized communities and those who simply don't have many resources?
I'll answer that as a deaf athlete myself. Well, since I was 13, 14 years old, did not have the opportunity to have communication access. Um, for the most part, is funding and communication access and understanding cultural differences and similarities. Especially for the deaf community, we are like stuck in the middle between disability, disabled, and non-disabled, able-bodied. Um, it's one or the other. So the communication access doesn't really come in until later. That's what I have to fight for, making communication uh, accessibility and accommodations, and many places will not. And that was so important to develop athletes from the time they're young. And I mean, many of the deaf athletes have that in deaf schools, but not didn't have access to sport psychology professionals. I mean, I wasn't, let's see, gosh, I wasn't familiar with it because I was always I think most of us older athletes now, it's like no pain, no gain. I played basketball for the University of Tennessee at Pat Summit, and she incorporated a lot of the sports like techniques. She was a tough one. She was one that got me involved. I needed mental health help because it was tough with pressure, and she opened the door for that for me. And so I'm trying to provide these services for deaf athletes around the U.S. and around the world too. And so now with the partnership with the University of Western States, I'm excited because it's the first time in the 100-year history of the Deaflympics, there will be the USA team will have a sports psych team, or we call it the USA Performance Psychology team. And we're really excited about it. And I'm hoping it becomes the model. We have 6 students with one being an alternate. We'll take 5 of those students. We have 4 professionals and 3 interpreters. So it's taken a while, but funding that is not given by the USOPC as it is with the Olympics and the Paralympics. They give some assistance in the past, but not so now. So each athlete is going to Tokyo has raised $8,500 and coaches too. Keely, you want to add?
Yeah, I think when Becky came to me and suggested that I join her on this adventure, which was an extremely generous offer, my first reaction is, what is the Deaflympics? And I love sports. I've been involved in sport my entire life. I've been following sports, and I've never even heard of the games. I'm kind of curious, Julia, as before getting ready for this podcast, and kind of when did you learn about the Deaf Olympics? Which I heard from Dr. Clark, the good joke about it. It's the best game that no one has ever heard about.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, what I will say is that I went to undergrad with Liz, and she had posted something on Instagram about Western states and the Deaflympics partnership. And of course, this podcast is all about athlete mental health and telling stories that mainstream sports media doesn't really cover. And when Liz posted that on social media, I DM'd her and went, "Oh my gosh, I don't know who I can contact to learn more about this, but admittedly, I don't speak with a lot of deaf athletes. Think I've admittedly done a pretty good job with Paralympic coverage through the almost 120 episodes of this podcast that I've done, but I don't speak a lot with deaf athletes. And so I thought that shining a light on this partnership as well as educating myself was a really good way to kind of figure out this partnership and the story and what you guys are working on. I'm really excited to kind of jump further into that partnership as this interview goes on.
Yeah. And I think that's precisely it, right? And boy, did I learn this the hard way with Becky and many interpreters laughing at me along the way. But it's the little things like speaking about it. We don't speak, we communicate. Because that's kind of or little phrases that we have like, have you ever heard about it? No, I don't. And I think that was kind of my first step of starting to understand how much I do not understand, and starting to understand this really significant gap in communication, which in essence require any hard of hearing or deaf athlete to want to come to me, adjust their communication pattern and their preferred communication in order to receive services, as opposed to us saying, hold on, like what is our role and how do we always talk about meeting our clients where they're at, but we're asking them to make probably one of the most difficult adjustments to make, which is in the preferred communication pattern. So I think that's kind of step one. And you were asking, and we kind of got to it, what's the value of that? Mental training is a key component of getting to those highest level of competition, and performance. And at some point, your physical training, your tactical training, it's reaching that limit, that stability in the high level. It comes from the mental training. If we're saying there is populations that don't get that type of training unless they lucked into a coach who gets a little bit more of that, then essentially we're saying your chances of getting to those spaces is very limited. And I
Mhm.
think that's where Dr. Castillo, who is the director of the program, and I were kind of like, wait a minute. We all at UWS talk about one of our core values is diversity and inclusion and equity. So how do we actually do it? And from that came a huge commitment from us, first to acknowledge that we haven't been doing it. And second, to say, okay, if I were to work right now with athletes in Spain, I would need to figure out how to communicate effectively. I would need to learn Spanish. I would need to, do something different. In the same space, we're in the US and yet we're not doing it. So the first commitment that came from us is we all need to learn ASL. And don't get me wrong, I don't excel at that, to put it mildly. And languages in general is something that don't come easy to me. English is my second language, and I'm, you know, working on it with it. But that's the first step. If we want to show that, yes, we're truly want to meet you where you're at, and we're not going to demand of you to make all the adjustments, I need to show some level of commitment to communicating in your preferred language. So I think that's kind of the step of where I see it, um, and where we're hoping to take it.
Can
Yeah,
I
I
add to
mean,
that just a little bit, just about
sure.
the language part and for the deaf athletes? There's a variety of different communication languages. For the most part, the high percentage with American Sign Language. There are 300 sign languages in the world or more. So when you go to the games, the team, the students, and the professionals, all of us will be exposed to different sign languages. Uh, but with the American team, there are those who maybe just speak or oral deaf who do not sign. The majority of them will sign. The majority of is American Sign Language, ASL. Others may have SimCom or just different types of how they communicate. So, like Gily said, we'll have to adjust to each of these athletes' preference of communication.
Were you born hard of hearing, Dr. Clark?
Yeah, I was born hearing. I
Okay.
lost my hearing later, around 13, 14, some. I got hearing aids, still could hear until I got to college. I used to tease Pat Summitt, loved to scream. I lost my hearing because of that and that. It's true. One of those coaches. Oh. But I learned sign language in college and, and learned about the deaf culture and deaf Olympics, and the rest is history. But there's a variety of different types of deaf. Yeah. I often have people tell me, said, "Oh, you're not deaf, you speak." I said, "I wasn't born deaf." So thank you for that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that with the athletes, the Paralympians specifically that I've spoken to on this podcast, they have physical difficulties. So they've grown up in adaptive athletics.
Mhm.
When you are on a team like Pat Summitt's at Tennessee that is steeped in history and you come in hard of hearing, how does that change the way that your team communicates with you?
Well, it was interesting when I arrived. Um, I I'd given up a 3-year scholarship to UCLA, and I realized, deaf, how am I going to do this? How am I, I don't know. I don't know. Someone said, "Oh, well, you can go and major in deaf education." My goal was not deaf education. It was pre-med, become a medical doctor. And all of this was just new to me. All of a sudden, it was like people were telling me, you can't, you can't, you can't. And that's a lot what we hear with deaf athletes and deaf people or people with disabilities in general. How much you can't, then you can. So I arrived at Tennessee. I knew 3 months of, I'm originally from Tennessee. You hear a little bit of my Southern accent. When I sign it, I slow down, stutters my Southern voice. Um, when I arrived at Tennessee, I had interpreters in the classroom for the first time, had no clue what they were saying except for a few signs. And I was taught that it was not nice, this is a Southern thing, to stare at someone. Well, I had to look at the interpreter to understand. I could still hear a little bit from professor, but still didn't understand. So I was like caught in the middle. So I gave up the scholarship at UCLA, went, walked on at Tennessee, and they provided an interpreter. And I've never used an interpreter in any type of sport. I'm like, how does this work? She's down here by the time I sprinted down the other way. So I had to have the eyes behind my head too. So it was really difficult. And I didn't really understand the interpreter that much. So I made the team. Oh gosh, there was no interpreter anymore. I didn't know that I could fight for one. I didn't know how to use one. These are some of the things that we are learning or teaching the students too, how to use an interpreter. That's so important. You don't, you know, uh, include the interpreter as a person in. It's just communication access. You look at the person that you're talking to, not the interpreter. But that was a very difficult year for me in adjusting and adapting to different cultures and languages and the way people outside my hearing world was no longer my hearing world. And I'm learning all about the oppression and, just a lot what you can't get. So that's a lot of education we have to do also. There's, as long as we have the communication, for the most part, that's helpful. But, it opens doors in that way.
Gilly, you mentioned that you had been in the army in Israel.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Israel. I got my undergrad degree in Israel. And I moved here to pursue my education in sports psych. It didn't exist in academia in Israel back in the day. It does today. But that's relatively new from the last 3, 4 years.
What is the importance of, this is for either one of you two to start us off with, what is the importance of the USA Deaf Sport Federation?
Important. It is the national governing body of deaf sport in the USA. It will be celebrating 80 years when we get to Tokyo. And the Deaflympics is the second oldest multi-sport games. Who's first? The Olympics. Second, Deaflympics also just turned 100 years old. Imagine 100. So we don't have a big party. We're in Tokyo. But seriously, it's been around a long time. But what? Not been visible. Whether we don't fall into the disabled body physical um, category or classification, and we're not hearing. So we'd have to fight a lot about getting visibility. That is so important. But it's been around a long, long time, and I learned a lot too. My first games, I went to 3 Deaf Olympics, but in the sport of volleyball, because they didn't yet have women's basketball that first year that I played. They decided at the last minute they would, but I was already committed to the volleyball team. And it was really interesting in how I had to grow and communicate among my teammates, my deaf teammates, because there was some, variety of different types of communication were very helpful. If I didn't understand something, they'd push me in position. But it's astounding because you can't really communicate visually while you're playing. Verbally, yes. So we have like one or two signs, but it was really a learning process for me. So by the time I got to LA and 85 games, Deaf Olympics, where we won the gold, that was precious. I would say, you are now part of us. And that was a, a long 4 years learning curve for that matter. Uh, but I would never it changed the experience just because it's Deaf Olympics. It's really competitive.
And kind of going off of that, I mean,
Can
you're,
I?
of course, yeah.
Sorry, sorry.
Don't apologize. This is your interview too.
I'm thinking when I heard about the Deaf Olympics, so I got through this process of why do we need Deaf Olympics game? Why isn't it part of the Paralympics or why isn't it part? And then the obvious answer to that, because they're able-bodied. I was like, okay, so why aren't they part of the Olympics and we're making the necessary adjustments? And part of it is because most deaf athletes don't have access to the same level of training that hearing athletes have. You have to make adjustments, and usually those that can make it come from a pretty high socioeconomic status. You have to pay your way. You have
Sure.
to provide yourself with the communication. You have to essentially pay for the gap in communication. It's on the athlete, which creates, enhances the gaps. And when you look at it and say, okay, so why not Paralympic and create a category for that? Well, because again, they're able body. You can solve it. Like think about track. You can solve it pretty easily. You just need to have a light component or a visual component to start a race as opposed to just a gun. And I think this is where the Deaf Sport Federation is really crucial because their job is to advocate for that and to essentially say, look, these are practical manners that we can try to overcome the gaps, that we can encourage sport, which we know is crucial for mental health and well-being for everyone, and enhance activity in the population in the whole, and foster talent, which exist with non-hearing and hard of hearing athletes as well. Just in the last Olympic, there were five representing the US in different sports. We had a kayaker. Um, Becky,
No,
help me out here.
I'm trying to think of this past Olympics. You're talking about Paris.
Yeah, Julie, I think you're
Yeah,
gonna have
we
to
had
fact check
one
us on
male
it.
volleyball player. There's been a few deaf athletes who have competed in the Olympics. For the most part, the communication access they took care of, but money, all of that the other deaf do not have opportunity. But I do want to say that ICSD, otherwise known as the governing body of deaf sport worldwide, like so we call it Deaf Olympic Organization. It oversees all of the world deaf NGOs, national governing bodies. Um, Recently, well, not recently, maybe 25, 30 years ago, we have the MOU between the Paralympics and the Deaf Olympics, which is interesting, the first ever given. Interesting information. It's very significant too. The Deaflympics was one of the co-founders of the Paralympics before it was the Paralympics. It used to be the Stokely Manley Games, and then they changed to the Paralympics. But the issue was fun, interpreters and the cost of interpreters. We include deaf in the Paralympic. Oh my gosh, it becomes a mini Deaf Olympics within the Paralympics. So the MOU that was signed between the Paralympics and the Deaflympics was that if there is all right, in the Paralympics, if there is the primary disability for the Paralympics is physical disabilities. There are some hard of hearing and deaf. And in the past, one of the most outstanding swimmers for the Paralympics was Becca Myers, who's deaf with Usher syndrome, became blind. She qualified for 3 games, won many, many golds, and the ESPY awards for the best athlete and so on. But that third Olympics in Tokyo, they're not allowed. Well, there was the pandemic. They would not allow her personal person that needed to be because she was deaf and blind. They said they had five. The U.S. Team had 5 A's. That's not enough for a full Paralympic team. So she backed out. But the point is, with the Paralympics and the Deaflympics is, um, if if the Paralympics have an athlete, you must meet 55 decibels loss or that in your better ear, if that makes sense, or more. And you could qualify if there is a sport that would fit that in the Deaf Olympics. Now, for the deaf athletes could qualify if they had a physical disability too, similar to Becca. Because Becca was born deaf later, visually impairment, and that's how she qualified for the Paralympics. But anyway, so that was the signed an MOU. That was the start. But the big cost of being part of the Paralympic is that they were able-bodied, they had to provide interpreters, and it becomes the mini game. And the deaf sport world say, we cherish our games. We don't have to send only maybe 20 to 30 athletes when we have over 3 to 4,000 athletes from around the world. Okay, sorry, that's just a long history lesson there.
I appreciate it. So, what I will say is that there is a timer up in the corner of this interview. Once that timer runs out, this we'll get out of this interview and we'll get back in. The same link will apply and we'll
Oh,
just
I
keep
see now.
going. We do get timed out of this meeting though.
Okay.
So the same link will apply. We'll just hop out of this one and get back in, and then we'll continue.
And to follow up on what we were just saying, David Smith competed in Paris in volleyball. Aaron Small was a sprint kayaker, and Drew Kibler the swimming. So three athletes who were deaf and competed in the Olympics in Paris in 2024. And I kind of think to myself, What type of team, especially if you're looking at those individual athletes, what type of team did they have to have around them, and how many more challenges did they need to work on to set up in order to be able to compete? Um, it, Managing the logistics, and I'm not even just talking about the funds. It's a lot of attention and work and capacity that at the end goes away from training, to be able to put it towards setting up and making sure that they can see the start call, and they can you know follow what is happening and be able to communicate with the rest of the people out there.
One of the great skills of deaf athletes, they can anticipate. We have lots of experience with that. That's one thing that Pat Summit always said to me, Becky, you're not going to hear on defense, when I'm on defense, set a screen against well, the offensive team set a screen on me as the defensive player. If I don't see it coming, I can't hear my teammates say switch or pick, slam right into the player every time. She called a timeout. She said, "You are not allowed to switch. You got to see that pick coming." Oh boy, pressure. Where's my sports psych? Anyways, things like that. So I learned the great skill of anticipating.
Speaking of having representatives looking out for your best interests as a deaf athlete, how do you compile this team that works with the Deaflympics? What goes into scouting those individuals? What kind of personalities and backgrounds professionally do you need in order to feel like you've crafted a well-rounded athletic support system?
It's a great question. Um, Deaf athlete are representing the US demographic. So at the end of the day, we need to make sure that our team is diverse as well. That's kind of piece one. We know that as consultants, many times we're most effective when clients can relate to us and um, think that we can probably understand what their experience is because we're sharing at least some of our identities, and some of the experience that they may have. So that was definitely one key component. We wanted to make sure we're diverse and representing different background, different ethnicities, different genders, different everything. But I think that was almost like the second step. The first step is how good are you? And how good are you is really determined in terms of your ability to meet the client where they're at. We were definitely searching and hoping to get more members on the team that are fluent in ASL. Those are a very rare commodity to find. In fact, one of our team members, he's a UWS alum that we trained, and now he is one of the lead consultants in the team, which is extremely exciting. He just graduated with his doctorate. We're all like, yes.
Now there are two of us deaf sports psych. We have one CMPC certified mental performance consultant who is an athlete on the men's deaf soccer team. So maybe next time but there are three of us in the world. And
So
UWS has two of them.
yeah, and I think the approach we took in selecting the members of the team was actually I should probably take a step back. So Dr. Sean Flanagan, who goes by Skip, he was our student who came to do his doctorate at UWS a few years ago. And he wanted to take the applied training track to become a CMPC. And one of the things that we do at UWS for all our students, but it was definitely there with Skip, is our student body we're an online program, so our student body is literally all over the world. And not too often, but I would say 5 to 10% of our students live outside of North America. And the first language where they're providing services and going through their applied training is not in English. One of the things that we aim to do is we don't always succeed, but we definitely try to find mentors, approved mentors, CMPCs that are that speak the language. And the reason for that is we cannot mentor someone in a language we don't understand, or we cannot do it effectively. We can, but we can have a whole conversation about how ethical and professional that is. So, in order for us to be able to do that, Dr. Clark and Dr. Castillo have a long relationship. And she reached out to Becky and said, hey, we have a student that wants Skip. He wants to provide services both in English with an interpreter, but also in ASL. And in order for him to do it in ASL, we have to have someone that understands what it is they're doing. And Becky agreed and came on board. So this is kind of how it started. And this is where we started the process, or I started the process of understanding how much I do not understand. And understanding it. So we had a student from South America, and we had and many students in different cultures where we saw that the practices that we have in place don't necessarily fit. But this was a different type of fitting, not fitting. Um, it's not that the practices that we engage in don't fit, it's the culture is definitely different. The approach is different. I think if we all tend to come in with this like medical perspective of disability, when you actually meet with hard of hearing and deaf people and athletes, many times that's not their perspective, which got us to kind of shift and say, okay, so there are more challenges, logistical many times, always, not always, but nearly always around communication. Um, and it's definitely leaking into the performance domain. So you have to work with a hard of hearing or deaf athlete to help them figure out how to approach that. How do I approach it when I come into a competition venue and there is no interpreter, or I need to advocate for myself, and how frustrating it is, and essentially create a pre-performance plan, just like you would do to anything else that is around this issue. So it started to get us to shift in our understanding of what it is that we need to do and how do we approach it and how do we meet the needs of different athletes, but also different sports, different cultures, putting all of that together. The main component in all of the team members that we were look for is pure curiosity and the ability to recognize that they don't know. So we were looking for people who know that they know sports psych, know that they have something to offer, and have good level of faith and belief and confidence in that. And at the same time, they're happy to be wrong. They come in very curious, and they come in understanding that they don't understand. Those were essentially the people we were looking for when we were trying to build up the team.
What are you most expecting either one of you to get out of this partnership?
Honest answer? I don't know. I'm very curious to see where this goes. I know Becky had years to think about how this could shape up and where she wants um, reality and culture to start shifting towards. I don't know that I have been involved in this long enough to have that vision yet. Um, on a very simplistic term, my goal is to continue enhancing my ability to communicate in ASL to the point that I can offer services in ASL one day without an interpreter, even, but there's a way to go. um, and essentially creating opportunities to meet the needs of that. But it's the needs of these athletes. But I think it's for me, it's a little bit too early. So I am going to let Becky take this one. Actually, there's another space. The hope is that we're building a system that is going to continue in future games as well, winter and summer. That's definitely a hope to create a support system that is similar and different in how it needs to be to what is offered to all Olympians in the US.
For sure.
Yeah, I want to add to this. I've tried with US Deaf Sport Federation for many years also to offer these services either myself alone or while we're training, who's out there that knows sports psych, who may be deaf or hard of hearing. That's the first way inside the deaf community, which is very close, which is opening now to outsiders because of all the terrible experience and oppression. Um, and then by peer, this started with asking Dr. Costello, Dr. Meir, I said, why don't you come to the Deaf Games, to the Deaflympics to get the experience? It'd be amazing, just amazing. So many sign languages, so many cultures, it's just very, very diverse. And see everything. And next thing I know, we're creating a course and setting up a team ourselves. And I'm thinking, I'm being hopeful while there are other deaf and hard of hearing, uh, I would say, students out there learning sports psych and mental health both. Um, it's still not enough. It's still not enough. So I'm hoping that we create a service, a model for UWS that can be copied or replicate. I can't pronounce it. That's my deafness here. That can be shared with other universities that will continue on to, well, who knows. But this is our first time, USA Deaf Sport Federation first time too, and we're really excited. So like what we say, we're building the plane while we're flying it. And just get a lot of experience and a lot of grace with each other, what works and what doesn't work. And of course the big things like um, funding for outside of our actual cost of going, what we need, what can we provide. And I'm hoping that this grows even more. And we don't have to think about it 10 years down the road, that we do have opportunities to provide for those who don't have the opportunities. If that makes sense. But it's an exciting time. Everyone is in this partnership is exciting. USOPC, I met with them, the psychological service director last week or 2 weeks ago, and they're excited about it too, to provide mental health first aid for our team. They're like, what, Gilly, how many? There are 2 students or 3 students who are like me, dual trained, mental health and sports psych. I know.
There are two members that are, in
Okay.
addition to Dr. Clark, two members that are already licensed and two more that are counseling students right now. So they're not yet licensed, but they're fairly advanced in their training.
So it's exciting. So we'll offer both. I think very important, since the Tokyo Games for the Olympics and Paralympics, mental health is very, very, very important in addition to the mental performance. It's all together. So it's an exciting time, and I'm ready to go. We've got a lot. Wonderful thing about UWS is they started with this course or this training. I'm going to call it training. It's a year-long training almost. Started in January. We started with the cultural training, uh, language, ASL, learning, just learning, learning, learning. And now we're going into the applied part of it and of the training all the way to November. The games in Tokyo, that's the sign for Tokyo, Japan, November 15th through the 26th. So we have the training plus the games, a little over what, about 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks. So I would just have some. If you're interested, Julia, you want to be a document this experience for USA team performance. Uh, I'm sorry, performance psychology team. Big, a lot to say there, and just document it, and just it's just amazing. It's just going to be an amazing experience.
I mean, like, that sounds incredible. This sounds like an amazing partnership. I hesitate to say something that should have happened about 20 years ago, but I feel like starting it now is as amazing a time as ever because you're equipping athletes with ways that they can continue participating in sport. And I think that's really important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm happy to have help now. I mean, for a long time it was just me in private. There was a team together. U.S. Deaf Sport Federation wasn't ready, and neither was we didn't have any other trained sports psych, and now we do, and it's just like we're behind, but we're setting the gold standard. Hear the word gold. Say, associate gold.
I think there is another side to this as well.
Yes.
Um, Foolishly, I thought that we're going to come in and everyone's just going to be very excited. We're providing all of the services pro bono. It a great opportunity for all sides. I thought everyone is just going to be all over it. Um, and what we have experienced, what I've experienced, which Becky's experienced for the last couple of decades, but it was a new one for me, is a real hesitation from the USA DSF as well as the athletes to kind of be like, wait a minute, you're coming in a team of 10 people, only two of you are part of our community, and you're going to tell us how to do things.
Right.
Which is, you can, in 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 honesty and fairness, I am still trying to process. Um, the resistance, it's a little bit of a fear, a little bit of experience that have taught them that at the end of the day, they're probably the one who are going to need to make the accommodations on communication. And we come in with the best of intentions, and they can see that. And we're going to have to work very hard to win their trust and demonstrate that we are truly going to meet the communication demands of the athletes, that that's the center of everything at this point, and that it's going to be fairly offered to everyone. So one of the fears is because so many of us are hearing is that only oral deaf athletes are going to be able to come and receive our services. And they want to make sure that, it's equitable around for all of the athletes. So I think in these games, it's really about proof of concept, first and foremost, demonstrating that you can be hearing and be a true ally. And what does a true ally look like? I think that's going to be the center of these games and this experience, both from, like Dr. Clark said, we've been working very hard to educate ourselves, um, building a full curriculum with meeting with people from the community, reading a lot, trying to get ourselves, it's really deaf culture 101 is kind of what we've been doing. Um, and as we go through this and as we understand the experience, it's become very clear of, okay, at this point, we don't even know what to ask a lot of times. We don't understand what we don't understand. And I'll give you interesting examples. Um, we wanted to do workshops that are open to the entire athletic body. So anyone who is interested can sign up. And the idea was to create both something that is tangible that they can take away, but also really to create a hook to get them to come to us for more services. That's the goal of it. And we started off and we said, okay, how do we run? Like it's going to be all virtual. How do we run that Zoom? And then we say, okay, we probably need to do a survey in the beginning to understand what are the communication preferences. How do we even run this? Just writing that question of how would you prefer to communicate, it's a minefield that we were walking because we don't we understand so little about the experience that we could not even word it correctly. So we write up a question and then we send it to Becky and Skip, and they're looking at it like, let's try again. And going through all of these adjustments, recognizing that how we even choose to communicate and ask the question is not straightforward. Um, so I think those are the pieces that are really, if I'm being very honest, we are learning how to be effective allies at this point. In addition to how we now we're finally getting into the steps of how to be effective consultants. So I think that's kind of the space that we're in at this point, and probably the main thing that we're going to focus on in these games is a proof of concept that we can do it, we can support, this can be effective. And we're constantly having in our back of our mind, okay, and how do we scale it up? And scaling it up, it's in the sense of, you know, if we're going to meet the athletes in Japan, we're not going to be very effective. We have to meet them now and start working with them now to be effective. So, how do we create a system where these services are accessible to the different NGOs, the different national governing bodies, and if we have a volleyball coach who's working with a deaf team, they know that this exists, this service exists, and it can be utilized even though we're hearing, even if we don't have someone who is communicating in ASL. So that's really, I think, the main goals that I see kind of moving forward is establishing that, raising awareness that there is such a thing as mental training, and you can have it too, even if you're coming, even if it's not the same language, even if it's not offered regularly in your training spaces and all of that. I think that's really where we're at this point.
Dr. Clark, specifically, what part of sports psychology and having these resources available do you think that deaf athletes will take the most advantage of?
Well, simply, I would say what in sports psychology, I would say, first of all, that we can communicate in their preference. What? But in terms of what they're like any other athlete on the world stage. How do you manage the pressure? What are the mental skills I need to get to that gold or medal or winning to play the best I can? I'm gonna put it that way. I would say outcome of a medal, but playing the best that I can possibly be and representing the USA. That's what excites him. Anything that can give him that edge. And the USA team will be the first deaf team will have one in the Deaflympics. So there's going to be a lot of eyes on us. But I really truly believe once that we've had the opportunity to introduce ourselves and what we're doing. Right now we're working with the US Deaf Federation, team director for the Deaf Games, the president, the board. And soon we'll start working with the athletes when they realize the service that we offer. I think they're really got to run with it. What confidence, how to keep your confidence, how to manage your emotions, focus. Gily, help me out. What else more we want? Also, and managing emotions in the mental health realm too. But go ahead, Gily.
Part of the biggest realization is the differences are not that different from
Right.
any other Olympic athlete or high level athlete. Everyone is going to have that dip in confidence.
Mhm.
There is something extremely overwhelming about the huge stage, and how do you manage that? all of that, and in addition, there is more demands on the system. So um, there is a culture shock for many of the athletes who are going to participate, both all of a sudden being fully immersed in a deaf experience and games, but also, as Becky was saying before, I can sign, but I can't understand anything because there's 300 different sign languages. And very few people sign in the international sign language. So that gap in communication, that cultural shock that we anticipate for US athlete getting to Japan, which is a very different culture, is going to be there. And I think in general, what we think is likely going to be experienced is just a very heavy um, demand on the system and being able to kind of refocus on what really matters right now. How do I put all of it aside? Um, and again, true to all athletes, but with what I think is going to be, and again, I haven't been there yet to feel it, but what I anticipate is how do I, what resources do I have and how do I utilize them? From my experience, it's something that most athletes don't know how to do. And it's a lot more crucial because the logistical demands are higher. So everything is a little bit more complicated. It's not something you cannot do. And I am also confident that for many of them, it's going to be second nature because that's been their lived experience. But like Becky described, her first games, it's not going to be for all. And I think that's a really big piece that we're anticipating that the spectrum is going to be really wide in terms of how foreign or familiar this experience is to them. And then how do you manage that and kind of stay in your lane of, okay, yes to all of this. And now I'm here to play a game and be the best that I can be and hopefully win. Of course, that's a big portion of it.
I also want to add some of the things that we're doing for the first time. We have the support of the U.S. Sports Diplomacy Department with the State Department. I will be going out of sports envoy 2 weeks before the games. Age and I both, more or less, working with the Japanese culture there, knowing that the games are coming first time ever in Asia. So there's that, and kind of like preparing the way. The U.S. Embassy in Tokyo will be hosting a reception for all our USA athletes, coaches, and staff. So we're really excited about that. So we might be very visible for the first time in 100 years. So I remember we have some fun, but yes, we have a lot of the challenges, and we're learning as we grow what works and what, as we grow and as we go, what will work, what not work, and we have each other, and that we're aware of what we don't know. Yeah, there we go. I'm going to steal that one from Gilly. Yeah, but seriously,
Yeah.
it's an exciting time. There's a lot of challenges, there's a lot of moving pieces, but I'm seeing a lot more support from outside or from within our country itself, the U.S., in different capacities, which is exciting for us. So, and we're going to do the best that we can to prepare. And we're looking forward to working with the athletes now until November. We established that relationship and through the games. And I will see if we get that documentary done. I'm looking at you. And then I've done that before, but it's a great story, but it's been a struggle for these deaf athletes and coaches to access services, especially sports psych and mental health services, support in games and the kind of sport that all the other athletes, easily have. And the fact that it's happening, we should celebrate that. But we will never rest on our laurels. We'll keep going.
So, Dr. Clark, I mean, you were talking about sport diplomacy.
Mhm.
I was looking up your background and I saw that you've been working in disability rights for years. Can you talk a little bit about your work in Thailand and China for the State Department? I mean, that's incredible. And then all Venezuela as well for specifically deaf athletes.
My most recently was Indonesia. We had a few deaf athletes that were the youth athletes that were integrating our hearing team that did not have the communication access. I didn't have communication access at that point either. Really interesting. Anyway, but for the most part, the State Department or the sports diplomacy department always provide. Now, Asia has been my interpreter throughout the sports diplomacy career that I've had as a volunteer. Are you familiar with uh, the first diplomacy was during sports diplomacy with Richard Nixon into China? And it's using sport or as an opening to discuss other issues, whether it's culture or things between the two countries or similar experiences, what's same and what's different. But we don't go in and say, hey, this is the way we do it, you must do it. It's an interchange, it's a friendship. And sport brings us close together. It's just a phenomenal opportunity with China. I learned about some of their challenges. They learned about ours, and people didn't think the U.S. had any issues. Well, we have plenty. Our deaf athletes can't get the services they need, with sports psych or any others, or the communication and developing their physical skills, their sports skills, tech, technical skills, and so on and so forth. And then we come up with how can we help each other? It's really a phenomenal, phenomenal experience, and there's nothing like it. And all the work that I've done, you know, um, it's very special in serving my country that way. And I'm looking forward for our team, the whole USA team, Deaflympics, plus our sports psychology team, and performance team, put it that way. Get that experience on a sports diplomacy level too, with the embassy, the people that we meet, and just the connections, and all because sport brings us together. There's no language that's the barrier.
I mean, that's why we're all here, isn't it?
Amen. Amen to that. It's exciting. I was thrilled. I haven't been there. I went out to Indonesia 2 years ago, but then when COVID started, I was there right when I got back from Thailand, and then for 4 years, talk about feeling lost. And I think the whole world was just shut down. Period. But if you're available, come join us.
I would love to. Holy
Get
cow.
that camera. We figure out funding for that for a documentary.
I mean, like in addition to doing this podcast, I am a professional broadcast videographer. Like I work for sports broadcasts.
Yes, I know.
So you're unintentionally talking to the right person if you want a documentary made. Like,
This is not unintentional. This is very intentional.
Now,
sign
unintentional,
me
I just
up, guys. Sign me up. But aside from that,
yeah.
are the questions that I had prepared for today. Is there anything else that you think that I missed about advocating for deaf athletes, the deaf athlete experience, the partnership that you guys have coming up for the Deaflympics? Is there anything that you think that I didn't go into enough detail about?
I don't think so. I will give it a little bit further um, thinking, but I think the biggest piece right now, I want every person in the US to know that athletes are going to represent them in Deaflympics games that no one has heard of. I think that's the biggest mission that I have on my plate at the moment. It makes no sense to me that so many people who are, they love sport, they're engaged in sport, they have no clue that this is happening. And I think that's my biggest issue right now with and why I'm doing this interview, which is very outside of my comfort zone.
Thank
Um,
you, Gilly.
I want to interject and say that you've done an amazing job.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Hey, I agree.
I think that's really the main goal moving forward. And for us as an organization, putting this on Ask, starting to not just make accommodations, which you would be surprised to find out how difficult even that has been. Um, Little things like putting captions on your Zoom. It's something that you can do and it's automatic and you don't need to ask someone, but no one knows because we don't need to. Um, so I diverted here a little bit, but I think really our main goal right now for these games and taking on all of these platforms is to get to the point that people are aware those games are happening. At the end of the day, deaf sport is not different from this. It's a business. You need to have consumers and spectators in order for funding to go. And I think that's the piece that is really going to elevate it and take it to the next level. So I'd want to be, I want to have people interested in how did they do? What was the medal count? Something that Americans are pretty
Yeah.
obsessed with. So kind of bringing that into attention and bringing the focus into that and getting to a point that it's not the best games that no one has ever heard of, but everyone knows what the Deaflympics is.
Thank you.
So I want to add also to Gary, one of the most need that we have for the U.S. Deaf Olympics, or in the world Deaf Olympics, is media. Uh, we need media exposure. We need to be visible, just like our own language. We're a very visual person. Many are of the athletes, the coaches, any or the deaf staff, all are ready and to be interviewed to tell you about the Deaf Olympics, tell you about deaf sport. What's great, and the games itself is just a poof. I can't wait. I just can't wait to watch my team's reaction when we get to Tokyo for the opening ceremonies alone. Just walking in that and seeing just amazing. A lot of visual stimuli. I mean, I tell them their eyes are going to be tired because you're going to be, communicating by your eyes for a lot of times. So we have to make, time for how to rest our eyes when we can. And I don't think you hear anybody says rest your ears. No. But I do also want to really thank Asia, who's volunteer interpreting for me today. I really appreciate it. And that thanks. I hope I'm not too tired from the hour long or more. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Very valuable. Thank you.
Thank you guys for coming on so much. This episode is slated for release on June 17th. So you have about a month. If anything happens between now and then that you would like included, talk to Julia. She can get me that information. If we get off this interview and you think, oh, darn, I should have included that piece of information, we can coordinate getting that into the episode. You have about a month, so no rush, but I'd also love to have you guys back on after the Deaflympics to kind of go over this experience because it sounds amazing.
Uh-huh. I can't wait to see that too.
But that's something we can coordinate further into
Thank
the
you.
future. Um, I just want to thank you guys. Like this was so fun for me to hear your perspectives and to have this kind of representation. I mean, this is why I started the podcast in the first place. And I don't think that deaf athletes are that different from Olympians. I mean, they're all elite athletes, and I think that they all deserve ample representation. So thank you guys so much for coming on,
Yeah.
talking about this.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing us to come and giving us the media too and this wonderful platform and informing, advocating and educating and having a little fun along the way too.
Thank you for educating me as well. Like, I feel like it's a mutual admiration society right now. Thank you for
So an
thanking me.
important, just I'm
Just like a
aware of the
deaf too,
timer.
we don't clap, we wave. Okay, I gotta go. There you go.